Hello friends, Paper Historian here. I'm glad to welcome you to my channel, where we don't just tell stories, we take you by the hand and walk you straight into the moments where history stops being a chapter in a book and starts feeling like the air you breathe. In today's video, we'll tell you about a man whose life narrowed down to a single mission, a single takeoff, and a single point on the horizon he was never meant to return from. We'll step into the cockpit with him, see the world through his eyes, and try to understand the mix of duty, belief, and inevitability that shaped the pilots known as Kamikaze. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the sound carry you. Because we're about to spend a day with someone who knew it would be his last. You wake to the sound of boots you've already counted in your head 100 times. Boots that move like metronomes across the barracks floor, steady enough to convince a man that order exists and loud enough to remind him he lives inside it. The smell in the air is that military blend of oil, rice steam, old sweat, and disinfectant that promises cleanliness. The way posters promise victory, and you lie still a few heartbeats longer, not because you're lazy, not because you're brave, but because you know today has that specific weight to it, like a sword laid flat across your chest, not crushing, just insistently present. And once you sit up, you'll have agreed to carry it. You make your bed with the same exactness you've practiced since the first week they taught you that corners reflect character, not because any ship at sea has ever surrendered to well-tucked blankets, but because mastering the small humiliations is the down payment on surviving the larger ones. You fold the blanket's edge tight enough to pluck like a shamisen string and smooth the pillow with the side of your hand, the way the senior petty officer showed you, as if a crease in cotton could cause a crease in fate. Breakfast is hot and unconvincing. Miso that tastes faintly of tin, rice that sticks together in a way that would make your mother sigh and your drill instructor nod, and pickles that bite your tongue awake. You eat all of it, slowly, because hunger has been trained out of you as a complaint and repurposed as a quiet engine. Then, you wipe the lacquered bowl clean with 2 swallows of tea and pretend not to notice the tremor in your fingers when you set it down. The barracks is too neat, which is how you know an inspection is either coming or has just left. Men talk in the low, flat voices of people saving their higher registers for shouting later. And somewhere down the corridor, a radio coughs out a march that has learned to be cheerful without being happy. You did not set out to become the kind of man whose day can be described by a checklist and a fuel gauge. You were not born at the controls of anything but your own stubbornness. There was a village, of course. There is always a village in these stories, with a hill that pretended to be a mountain and a river that pretended to be a road. And you did the things village boys do. You ran until your lungs reminded you were mortal. You learned which trees gave fruit and which gave hiding places. You pretended the emperor knew your name because teachers pretended too. And when recruiters appeared with their polished boots and their travelling certainty, you signed the paper because your father's fields were small and your family's hopes were smaller. And it seemed, in that moment, that a man could grow taller by standing under a flag. But we are not going to linger in the village, because nostalgia is a luxury product, and today's inventory does not include it. We will take only the necessary facts. Your brother's cough, your mother's apron that always smelled like smoke, your father's silence that could bend a room as efficiently as a plough, and carry them forward as talismans that do not quite work. The Navy sanded you down and stamped you flat. You learned quickly the difference between bowing and begging, between saluting and surrendering, between being shouted at and being heard. They shaved your head to make you identical from a distance and distinguishable only by your number up close. And then they poured rules into you until you sloshed with them. They showed you how to fold, to scrub, to march, to shout, to run, to collapse, to stand again, to run again. And at the end of that excellent demonstration of obedience, they told you you'd been selected for flight training. Which is to say, they decided your bones would be more profitable in the air than on the ground. You did not argue because argument is for men who still believe the future accepts edits, and you were trying very hard not to be one of those men anymore. Flying at first tasted like cheating, as if you'd found a way to step outside the ordinary laws for a little while. The instructors, men who had already tangled with clouds and lived to mock them, taught you to read instruments the way a priest reads faces, taught you to listen with your fingers for the exact moment. Lift stops asking and starts insisting, taught you that horizon lines are promises that panic tries to erase. You learned takeoff as a sequence of courtesies, learned turns as a set of negotiations, learned landing as an apology to the ground. Later, when the syllabus stopped pretending you would need to return, landing became something you practiced in your head so that the muscle wouldn't feel entirely betrayed. You could have become a competent pilot under different circumstances, the kind that grow old and curmudgeonly and yell about trim at new boys. But these were not different circumstances. Philosophy arrived between flights, carried in by officers whose uniforms fit like arguments and whose voices were smooth from repetition. The body is transient, the spirit is eternal, the emperor is both axis and purpose, the nation is your family, the enemy is an infection, death in service is not death but transformation. Cherry blossoms fall at their most beautiful, and so should you. You said the words with everyone else because not saying them would have been a recorded event with witnesses, and because when a man is tired enough, he'll accept any sentence if it lets him sit down. You watched older pilots, men who had already tasted the geography of failure at Midway and Guadalcanal, stand at the back of those lectures with faces like locked drawers. They didn't contradict, because contradiction is a kind of freedom, and freedom had already been requisitioned. But sometimes, after lights out, one of them would tell you a story about a carrier deck at dawn that ended not with banzai, but with, "I couldn't find my friend's plane in the lineup, and then I could." And you learned to tuck those stories into your pocket alongside your ration of sugar. Selection was not a trumpet, but a list. A petty officer pinned it to the notice board with the same care he used for menus and punishments. Men clustered with the soft, joking cruelty of people who are making sure fear has to push to get through. Your name was there, black ink pretending to be neutral. You felt the breath go out of you in a polite way, like a guest leaving early so the host can tidy. An officer said your squadron had been honoured, said the emperor had asked for such men, said your families would receive congratulations, said the enemy would feel your devotion as fire, and you bowed with the others because in that moment your spine belonged to the nation. That night, you wrote a letter you would later rewrite twice to make the brushstrokes look intentional, and you tried to decide which facts about yourself would be kindest to leave behind. The base by the sea was a collection of clean lines and unspoken agreements, where to stand, where to smoke, where to stare without being accused of thinking. You learned new routines, how to strap into a cockpit faster than a man can reconsider, how to track a ship's wake from a distance and turn it into a solution for a problem you will not get to celebrate solving, how to ride the engine's vibration like a horse you must not love. The planes were patched together from ambition and shortage, engines that coughed like old men and wings that would do their best as long as you did yours. The mechanics were magicians who didn't call themselves that, men with blackened nails and gossip that could diagnose a cylinder by listening to your taxi. You tried to make friends and failed in the usual military way, which is to say, you succeeded but learned not to call it that. Men became familiar without becoming permanent. You watched departures. They were theatrical in the way of necessary lies. There was sake, sometimes watered, sometimes not, poured into small cups that made bravery look large. There were headbands tied so tight, foreheads shone. There were speeches by commanders who did not say death so much as conjugate it beautifully. There were photographs, signed with the careful flourishes of boys trying on the gravity of men. There were waves that looked like salutes and salutes that looked like waves. And then there was the emptiness afterward. Not dramatic emptiness, just an extra bowl at lunch stacked neatly on the end of a table. Newspapers later delivered the edited versions back to you. Explosions rendered as exclamation points, pilots rendered as saints, families rendered as decorative frames for gratitude. You brought those papers to the latrine for their intended use and did not read the poems. You tell yourself you believe because belief is an efficient lubricant, and because disbelief here is like a squeak the wrench will come to fix. And yet small disobediences multiply in you with the quiet manners of mold. You take an extra minute to clean the canopy because seeing clearly feels like vanity, and you are in the mood for vanity. You carry your sister's wrapped candy in your pocket during ground drills, even though sugar is supposed to be a public event. You imagine, sometimes, absurdly, that you will be ordered to land somewhere after all, and you will do it beautifully, wings level, feet gentle, tail kissing the runway as if asking for forgiveness. You don't tell anyone these things. You just file them in the drawer marked impossible and try not to open it too often. Instruction about the mission's mechanics is precise in all the places you wish it were vague, and vague in all the places you wish it were precise. You will fly low enough to trouble water and mines because altitude invites guns with better manners. You will approach from the sun when the ocean's geometry allows, because a man looking into glare sees absolution, not airplanes. You will ignore the first traces as if they belong to a different day. You will keep your hand steady even when the plane moves as if it disagrees with your definition of straight. You will aim for the soft parts, elevator, flight deck, island, because steel has hierarchies too. You will not close your eyes. You will not flinch at the last. This is repeated because men understand last things. You will not allow yourself to think that the ship's tiny figures have names like yours, because that would be an error of compassion. And errors of any kind are unpatriotic. They show you photographs of successful strikes, plumes like handwriting, decks broken like bread, and they do not show you the flights that ended with engines that faltered, wings that sheared, bombs that failed, or pilots who misread distance and put their certainty into open water. They tell you the numbers in a way that suggests numbers have volunteered to be on your side. You do not ask what percentage of certainty will be assigned to you, because certainty is a word that prefers the plural. On afternoons when the wind cooperates, you fly circles over the bay to practice the only part of the mission that can be practiced without also concluding it. The shoreline slides under you with that indifferent graceland always has from above. Villages turned into arrangements, roads turned into threads, men turned into ideas. In those moments you feel both enormous and missing, a contradiction you suspect pilots have been pretending to enjoy since the first idiot strapped wings to logic. On the ground, you climb out smiling because the men who sign the fuel chits can smell doubt, and it makes them sarcastic. There is a small shrine at the edge of the field where the grass goes ragged and the sea air eats paint off posts. Someone's mother sent the little statue, someone's cousin carved the wooden box, someone's sweetheart wrote the calligraphy, and no one admits to caring about it while everyone touches the rail when passing, because sailors learned long ago that it is best to offend neither gods nor habits. Paper prayer slips, sharp with ink and weather, multiply there. You don't write one yet, because you're saving your good handwriting for a letter that will be read aloud at a kitchen table. And then, like weather that was forecast and still surprises, your name appears on the chalkboard beside tomorrow's date. The petty officer writes it in the same hand he uses for duty rosters and noodle allocations. Men glance, nod the nod reserved for events too big to decorate with adjectives, and go back to syncing their breathing with routine. A young pilot, newer than you and frightened in the visible way of people who haven't learned how to tuck fear into their sleeves, asks whether it feels like honor, and you say yes because he needs you to, and also because there's a kind of honor in saying what is required cleanly. That evening, you polish your boots to a shine that will be invisible in a cockpit. You lay out a fresh undershirt, as if decency will matter to the wreckage. You practice tying your hachimaki twice so your hands will remember while your head is busy. You write 3 letters, one to your mother, careful with formalities, careful with gratitude, careful not to apologize in a way that would let her imagine you regret something she can fix. One to your father, brief, respectful, leaning on the words duty and filial in the way a man leans on a fence post that has seen storms. And one to your sister, informal enough to include the candy's wrapper folded into a crane, A joke she will understand and keep in a drawer until keeping becomes a kind of pain. You do not write to the girl you talked to once under the persimmon tree because you will not give the war anything so sweet. Night brings the ceremonial calm that armies use to stride past chaos. The commander says the emperor's name as if it were wind. The chaplain says the ancestors' names as if he could dial them. The sake is poured, the cups are raised, the speeches are issued with the confidence of men whose own schedules do not include dawn flights. You drink the sake, warm and confusing, and it combs the edges off your thoughts long enough for sleep to pass, for sleep. Men snore in their bunks the way dogs do before storms. Someone laughs too loudly at a small joke and then goes quiet, embarrassed not by the laugh, but by the proof it left that he still has lungs. You set your alarm by habit and wake before it by instruction. The sky is the color of steel that has decided to stop pretending to shine. You wash your face in water so cold it could be accused of honesty. You knot the white headband with the red sun so tight your temples drum. You close your locker and run your fingers over the number stenciled there, as if making an impression on paint could leave a matching one on memory. Breakfast again, but today you taste everything. The miso's salt, the rice's stick, the pickle's small violence. You say very little and hear everything, the way a man does on days he has promised to be brave. And then, not yet to the plane, not yet to the runway, you go to the mechanic's shed because it is as close as you can come to prayer without kneeling. The chief mechanic, whose hands look like they could field strip a thunderstorm, nods to you and does not ask if you slept. He hands you a rag you don't need and you hold it anyway, as if it were permission. He recites the numbers of your engine the way a priest recites lineages. He tells you she's running strong, she's hungry, she's yours. You thank him with the last piece of civilian language you own. He pretends not to notice. The sun lifts its edge over the far water like a coin a miser considers returning. Orders crackle, pilots gather. The runway waits with that predatory patience only concrete acquires. You are designated third in the second wave, which feels like being told what time exactly to become a line in a report. Your crewman ties your parachute harness with a competence that feels like kindness, and then, because he is young and has not yet had the generosity trained out of him, he presses something into your hand. A small wrapped candy, red-striped, the cheap kind sold near train stations. And you nearly laugh, because you have the twin of it in your pocket from a season that was not a war. You do not laugh. You tuck it away, now a pair, as if matching small sweetnesses could alter the arithmetic. You are ready, which is to say, your boots are clean, your papers are in order, your letters are stamped, your head is wrapped, your body is calm in the practiced way an animal stills when the trap has already decided. Someone will come to fetch you when the engines begin to turn. Someone will place a hand on your shoulder and say the emperor's name. Someone will step back and salute as if the gesture could pin you to the sky. But for a few more minutes, thin, tender, disobedient, you stand just outside the hangar's shadow and watch the sea for the last time as a man who can still choose to turn around. And you let the wind move your sleeve, and you breathe as if breath were a rumor you want to start. You learn very quickly that the Navy does not train you to live. It trains you to die in the most productive, honourable and efficient manner possible, which is to say, in a way that inspires those left behind to clap politely at your funeral, while whispering about how they hope their own sons are not next. You are told this without quite being told. It's there in the speeches about honour, in the diagrams of enemy ships you're meant to memorise down to the position of each anti-air gun, in the way your instructors look at you not as a young man to be moulded, but as a tool to be sharpened for single use. You understand that here, the concept of career advancement means becoming a better example for propaganda posters. They give you a new uniform, tight where it shouldn't be, and loose where you'd prefer some structure, but it's clean, crisp, and makes you look almost respectable. A nice touch, considering that within a few months it will be soaked with sweat, salt, and the knowledge that it will one day be replaced with a flight suit you won't return in. The uniform is not about you. It's about the idea of you. That idea is simple, disciplined, loyal, fearless, uncomplaining. Whether you're any of those things in reality is none of anyone's concern. Training begins at dawn because apparently the sun is the only witness worth impressing. You run laps until the edges of the world blur, drill until your muscles are both numb and screaming, and bow so many times your spine starts to believe it's supposed to fold permanently. There are lectures too, long droning monologues from men who look like they were born in full military dress, talking about Bushido, sacrifice, the eternal glory of giving your life for the emperor. You suspect they mean it. You also suspect that if someone offered them a chance to live comfortably until old age instead, they'd take it without so much as a bow. It's here you meet the others, the men who will, in all likelihood, vanish alongside you into the sea or a plume of fire. They come from farms, fishing villages, factories, even universities. Some are barely out of boyhood. Others have the kind of weathered faces that tell you life had already been chipping away at them long before the Navy got involved. You learn quickly not to ask about families, not because it's forbidden, but because it's unnecessary. Every story ends the same way, with a photograph tucked away in a pocket, a promise to write that may or may not be kept, and the unspoken agreement that if someone doesn't come back, no one needs to say why. You study aircraft like they're living things. Every bolt, every gauge, every whisper of the engine becomes part of your mental map. The Zero fighter, sleek, nimble, deceptively delicate in appearance, is introduced to you like an arranged marriage. You will fly it, trust it, die in it. You are told about its strengths, agility, range, the way it can turn tighter than an enemy expects. You are told, less often but still clearly, about its weaknesses. Light armor, limited protection for the pilot, the fact that its fuel tanks might as well be invitations to spontaneous combustion. You don't flinch. Not outwardly. Evenings are quieter, but not peaceful. There is always a hum in the air, the sense that the clock is ticking faster here. You clean your gear, polish your boots, and watch as some men write letters home, pausing after every few words as though each one costs them something they can't spare. Others gamble, smoke, or stare out at the horizon like they might catch a glimpse of their fate coming in with the tide. And then there's the ritual. You've heard whispers about it long before you see it. The ceremony of writing your last letters and preparing your personal effects for the inevitable. It's presented not as a morbid task, but as a dignified duty. You're given special paper, thick and smooth, as if your handwriting needs to survive longer than you will. You write to your parents, your siblings, maybe a girl whose name you still say in your sleep. You're told to speak of honor, of pride, of dying for something greater. You are not told to apologize for the abrupt end you are about to bring to your own life, but some men do anyway, hiding it in flourishes of calligraphy that might pass for poetry. The instructors also teach you the philosophy behind the kamikaze, though philosophy might be a generous term for what is essentially a military justification wrapped in ancient ideals. They speak of the cherry blossom, falling at the height of its beauty, of the samurai's willingness to meet death without hesitation, of the shame of surviving when your comrades have not. You listen, nodding, absorbing, though you can't help but notice the irony. You are told to see yourself as both an unstoppable force and an already dead man. You practice maneuvers you'll only get to perform once. Dive angles, approach speeds, compensating for enemy fire, all of it is rehearsed until your body can perform without your mind interfering. They say the key is to focus on the target, not the fear. They don't mention that the fear will follow you anyway, sitting behind your eyes like an unwelcome passenger. Weeks blur into months, each day a mix of exhaustion and grim acceptance. Some men volunteer eagerly, signing their names like it's a ticket to immortality. Others are less willing, but no one refuses outright. There's no way to. Refusal isn't part of the vocabulary here. The closest anyone comes is a pause before agreeing, a hesitation so brief it can be smoothed over by the next bow. Your turn is coming. You can feel it in the way the instructors look at you a fraction longer during drills, in the sudden generosity of an extra helping of rice at dinner, in the way one of the older pilots claps you on the shoulder and tells you to fly straight and true, as if he's passing a torch you didn't ask for. You dream of the ocean more now, not the gentle lapping of waves on a shore, but the vast, swallowing dark of open water. Sometimes you wake with the taste of salt in your mouth and realize you've been clenching your jaw so hard it aches. The night before your name is called, you sit outside looking at the stars. They are impossibly bright, as if mocking the dim, flickering lanterns of the barracks. You think about the sky you'll soon be flying into, about whether you'll have time to notice it on the way down. A friend sits beside you, says nothing for a long while, then hands you a small packet of dried fish, a gesture so simple, so human, it nearly breaks you. You share it, chewing slowly, as if dragging out the taste could somehow slow the approach of morning. And when morning comes, you rise without being called, your body already moving through the motions it has been taught. Fold the bedding, dress, bow, eat though you barely taste it. The air feels heavier, thicker, as if it knows what's about to happen. You are handed your orders, and with them, the knowledge that the long, exhausting rehearsal is over. The performance, the only one you'll ever give, is about to begin. The day you are chosen is not marked with fanfare. No brass bands, no ceremonial gongs, just a thin slip of paper and the steady voice of an officer who has delivered this same sentence to countless others before you. His tone neither cruel nor kind, just efficient. You read the assignment, though there's nothing on it you didn't already know in your bones. The target, the route, the squadron you'll fly with, a one-way ticket written in military shorthand. You bow because that's what's expected, and because your legs feel a little too stiff to do anything else. The next hours are not about training. They're about stripping away the final threads tying you to anything other than the mission. You surrender your personal effects, photographs, letters, the little wooden amulet your mother pressed into your palm when you left home, all collected and stored in neat boxes, labeled for delivery after action. You know the euphemism. You know most of these boxes will arrive damp with grief and seawater. There's a final inspection, but it's not for the plane. It's for you. A senior officer looks you over as though he can spot cowardice the way a farmer spots blight on a crop. He adjusts your collar, straightens your belt, tells you that you look ready. You don't feel ready. You feel like a man trying very hard to impersonate someone who is. They feed you well that morning, better than any day in recent memory. Rice polished to a shine, grilled fish still steaming, miso soup so rich you almost forget where you are. There's talk in whispers that it's a superstition, a full stomach for a better journey to the other side. You eat it all, not because you believe it, but because you're suddenly terrified you might regret leaving anything behind. The others, your comrades, your soon-to-be ghosts, are quieter today. Not solemn, exactly, but stripped down to essentials. Conversations are brief, functional, without the filler of everyday chatter. Someone asks if your engine runs smooth at high throttle. You nod. Another warns about crosswinds near the target. You listen. No one talks about what comes after the target because everyone knows there is nothing after. Before you head to the airstrip, there's the ceremony. You stand in a small hall lined with the portraits of those who have already gone, faces that stare down at you with the stillness of photographs, men frozen forever in their best uniforms, their eyes somewhere between pride and resignation. You bow to them, though you're not sure if it's in respect or in acknowledgement that you'll soon be joining their ranks. A priest is present, his voice low and steady as he offers blessings, invoking the spirits of ancestors and the protection of the divine, though you can't help but note the irony. Protection is the one thing you're not here for. You kneel, receive a sip of sake, and feel its warmth travel down your throat like a reminder that you are still alive, for now. Then comes the writing of your final words, not the letters you wrote weeks ago, but a short message to be read publicly after your death, something that will make your name sound like it belonged to a man worth remembering. You keep it simple. A few lines about loyalty, about duty, about serving the emperor. It's what they expect. The truth, the real truth, the knots of fear and longing in your chest, is something you will take with you into the sea. The walk to the plane is longer than it needs to be. Or maybe it only feels that way because every step is another nail in the coffin you're building with your own feet. The air smells of fuel, oil, and the faint sweetness of blossoms carried from some unseen garden. The mechanics work with calm precision, their hands quick and sure as they check and recheck the zero that will be your final companion. You climb into the cockpit, the leather seat warm from the sun. Your hands trace the controls one last time, the way a man might run his fingers along the railing of a staircase he's descended his whole life but will never climb again. The engine coughs, then roars, and the vibration travels up through your bones until you feel like you're humming along with it. Before takeoff, there's a pause. The squadron leader gives a short speech over the radio, not poetic, not inspiring, just clear. The target, the formation, the weather conditions, the reminder that if you are hit before reaching your mark, you are to aim for the nearest enemy vessel anyway. There is no returning to base. The words are delivered without malice, like reading the rules of a game you've already lost. The runway stretches ahead, shimmering in the heat. You take a breath, deep and steady, though your chest feels like it's shrinking around it. The signal comes, and you push the throttle forward. The zero surges, the ground blurring beneath you, the nose lifting toward the sky. For a brief moment, the sensation is almost exhilarating, like every other takeoff you've ever done. Except this time, the sky is not a space to navigate, but a corridor leading to a locked door you have no key for. As you climb, the coastline falls away behind you, replaced by the endless blue of the ocean. The squadron flies in tight formation, silver wings catching the sun. You glance at them, knowing each cockpit holds a man in the same state as you, alive now, dead soon, holding on to the thin thread between those two states with white-knuckled fingers. The radio is mostly silent. There's nothing to say. The engine's drone becomes a kind of clock, ticking you closer to the end. You scan the horizon for the faint smudge of the enemy fleet, your eyes flicking between the instruments and the vast, empty expanse ahead. Somewhere in the distance, the clouds shift, and you think you see movement. The faint gleam of metal against water. Your heart rate doesn't spike. It sinks. This is it. You adjust your heading, tighten your grip on the stick, and focus on the target until the rest of the world narrows to that single point. There is no turning back now. Not that there ever was. You're in the air now, the ocean beneath you glinting like a sheet of hammered steel, the sunlight bouncing off the waves in a way that makes you think of the tiny ripples in your mother's wash basin. And for a ridiculous second, you're annoyed at yourself for noticing something so small when you are, quite literally, a man in the process of turning into a weapon. The cockpit smells faintly of gasoline, sweat, and the faint citrus note of the wax they used when cleaning the instruments this morning, and you find yourself wondering if someone deliberately polished them for you, as if sending you into battle in a clean, shiny death machine somehow counts as respect. The engine hums in that constant way that is both reassuring and ominous, like a heartbeat you know will stop, and you find your hands tightening and loosening on the control stick without meaning to, as though you could rehearse letting go. You glance out at the wings, painted with the red circles that have followed you everywhere since you first wore the headband, and you realize, absurdly, that you never learned how they actually decided where to place them, whether it's a regulation measurement or if some bored mechanic just eyeballed it one day and everyone else copied him. The target is still just a dot in the far haze, and you know you have time, time to think, which is dangerous. And so the memories creep in without asking permission. You remember the recruitment speech, full of words like honor and duty and eternity, words that sounded like they belonged to an older, more certain world, a world in which a man could die for his country and believe that this exchange of his life for a line in a textbook was not only fair, but glorious. You remember your instructor telling you that fear was a disease and that you had to burn it out of your mind like rot from a beam. But what he didn't tell you is that sometimes the rot is all that's holding the structure together, and when you scrape it away, the whole thing collapses. There's a photograph taped to the inside of your cockpit, just left of the altimeter, slightly crooked because the tape has loosened in the humidity. It's of your squad, all lined up in neat rows, their expressions a mixture of pride and something harder to name. And you look at the faces and wonder how many of them are already gone. How many are sitting in a similar cockpit right now, staring at their own crooked photographs? You tell yourself you're not going to cry, not because you're afraid of dishonor, but because the idea of your goggles fogging up at the wrong moment is humiliating in a way death is not. Your mind drifts to the rituals, the little things you did before each mission. Writing the farewell letters that no one would read until after the fact, drinking the sake that always tasted faintly of dust, no matter how fresh the bottle, tying the headband just so, as though the tightness around your forehead could hold your resolve in place. You think of the officer who inspected you this morning, how his eyes flickered for just a fraction of a second before he wished you good fortune. A meaningless phrase in this context, but you appreciated the effort. The target grows in the distance, now more than a dot, a shape, angular, purposeful, bristling with antennas and guns. A warship. You imagine the men on board, some of them still drinking their morning coffee, some maybe reading letters from home, none of them aware that you are the answer to a question they haven't asked yet. You wonder if any of them are looking in your direction right now, if some sharp-eyed sailor has just shouted a warning, if alarms are already starting to sound below deck. You think about the philosophy they taught you, about the idea that a man's life is not his own, that it belongs to his ancestors, his emperor, his nation, and you try to believe it now, try to wrap yourself in it like a blanket against the cold edge of fear that's been tracing your spine since takeoff. But there's another voice in you, quieter but persistent, the one that asks who gets to decide what your life is worth and why they always seem to make that decision from a comfortable office far from the front lines. The ship is bigger now, details resolving, the flat grey deck stretching out like a promise, the anti-aircraft gun starting to swivel lazily, as though they know they don't have to rush. You adjust your course by instinct, muscle memory taking over while your mind plays a strange double game. One part focused entirely on the mechanics of flight, the other wandering through the corridors of your past. You think of the schoolyard, of chalk dust and wooden desks, of the day you carved your initials into the back of a bench and the teacher caught you but only smiled. Perhaps because he recognized the need to leave a mark somewhere, anywhere. The sky is starting to feel smaller, the ship larger, and you realize you've been holding your breath. You let it out slowly, tasting the metal in the air, and you find yourself whispering an apology, though you're not entirely sure to whom, your mother, the ship's crew, yourself. You remember something your bunkmate once said after a long night of drinking, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. And you want to believe that's what this is, though another part of you suspects it's just momentum. Trace of fire blossoms in the distance, bright threads stitching the air, and you know they've seen you now. You lower your altitude, feeling the plane shudder slightly in protest, and the engine's steady hum shifts into a strained whine. The deck is wide open ahead of you, the painted lines clear, the crew scattering like ants from a kicked mound. You grip the control stick tighter, every muscle in your arms taut, the edges of your vision starting to blur from the speed and the adrenaline and the simple, unbearable fact of what you are about to do. You think of the poems you were made to memorize, the ones about cherry blossoms falling in the spring, beautiful because they die at their peak, and you realize, with a bitter laugh, that you never actually liked cherry blossoms. You always preferred the stubborn autumn leaves that clung to the branches long after they'd lost their color. The ship fills your vision now. You push the throttle forward. The plane responds like it knows its purpose, like it's relieved to finally be used for what it was built for. The world narrows to the crosshair in front of you, to the exact spot you're aiming for, and all the noise, the gunfire, the wind, the engine, merges into a single, overwhelming roar. In these last seconds, you see everything at once. The rice fields of your childhood, the dim barracks, the bright flare of the sunrise over the airfield, the faces of friends who didn't make it this far. You feel the weight of every choice you didn't make, every path you didn't take, and then, astonishingly, you feel nothing at all. Impact is not a moment, it's an erasure. The ship rushes up to meet you, there's a blinding light, and then silence. No pain, no sound, no fear. Only the lingering thought, like an echo that refuses to fade. You were here, and for better or worse, they will remember you. And so, the story ends not with a cheer or a grand parade, but with a single, almost imperceptible absence. A man-shaped space in the world that will never be filled again. Out there, somewhere far from the warmth of home and the steady rhythm of familiar streets, a piece of the sky was swallowed in fire and steel, and the ocean closed over it as if it had never been disturbed. Ships will sail again, planes will take off again, wars will continue their grim arithmetic, and the name of the man at the heart of this moment will dissolve into the long list of others filed away in archives that no one reads unless they have a reason. But maybe memory doesn't work the way historians tell it. Maybe it doesn't need ink or marble or carefully carved inscriptions. Maybe it lingers in subtler ways, in the way a cherry tree blooms by the road to a quiet village, in the way an old uniform hangs in a trunk, smelling faintly of dust and something sharper, in the way an elder pauses before answering when someone asks what it was like back then. The official records will call it a mission, list it as a sortie, attach numbers to it, coordinates, tonnage, casualties. But what it really was, what it always is a collision between the human heart and the machinery of history. And that machinery rarely cares for the individual gears that make it turn. Those gears, like you, are meant to wear down, to break, to be replaced without ceremony. Yet sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you can still hear them turning long after they're gone, their faint echoes stitched into the fabric of everything that comes after. Your life was not perfect. It was not long. It was not the life you might have chosen if choice had been freely given. But it was yours in the ways that mattered, in the glances exchanged with friends before dawn takeoff, in the quiet pride of a perfectly folded uniform, in the stubborn beat of your heart even as the sky narrowed and the horizon rushed to meet you. Those moments, invisible to history's cold gaze, are the ones that remain warm. Somewhere, someone might still tell your story, not the polished one in the official pamphlets, but the one with the jokes you told in the barracks, the way you once botched a formation because you were thinking about home, the way you complained about the rations but ate every last grain of rice anyway. It's those human fragments, scattered like petals on the wind, that resist being erased. The ocean keeps its secrets. The sky forgets quickly. But the earth, in its own way, remembers. In the rusting metal resting on the seabed, in the faint outlines of wreckage on maps long since redrawn, in the quiet sense that somewhere, once, a man decided to fly forward when every instinct told him to turn away. And so, as the night deepens and the telling of this tale comes to a close, perhaps the point isn't whether what you did was noble or foolish or even necessary. Perhaps it's simply that you lived a life with edges sharp enough to leave a mark. And if, in the dark, someone remembers you, even for a moment, then perhaps that is enough. You don't remember exactly when the idea first took root in your head, that vague, glimmering thought that maybe life could be more than rotting fish guts and the perpetual stench of salt-soaked rope. more than a leaky shack that creaks in the wind like it's trying to whisper you into an early grave. But you remember the moment you gave into it. A man in the tavern, face weathered like an old sail left too long under the sun, leaned across the splintered table and told you about a voyage. Not just any voyage, he insisted, but one led by a Genoese fellow named Cristobal Colon, though the tavern drunks who thought themselves clever kept calling him the Italian behind his back. And he wasn't just going to skirt the coasts like any sensible sailor. No, he planned to sail straight into the endless blue until it ran out, which, by all the logic you've ever been taught, it doesn't. You laughed, of course. Everyone laughs the first time they hear it. Straight west? That way lies only the great abyss where ships vanish and fall off the edge into the jaws of sea monsters with teeth the size of cathedral spires. But the man didn't laugh back. He just shrugged and said the pay was steady, the food was promised, and the Crown of Castile was footing the bill. You've never been paid steadily for anything in your life, and food is something you've only ever trusted when you could see it in your own hand. So you let the laughter die and leaned closer. That's how you found yourself on a dock in Palos, the air thick with the scent of tar, fish, and ambition, looking up at 3 ships that didn't look quite as heroic as the tavern tale had promised. The Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, though the men already had less polite names for each, none of which would sound noble in a royal ledger. You signed your mark in the ship's papers, a shaky X that might as well have been a death warrant, and took your place among the other poor bastards who had also decided that risking their lives on the ocean was preferable to slowly starving on land. The quartermaster handed you a hammock and a space to sling it between 2 beams below deck. It smelled like mildew and old sweat, but then again, so did everything else on the ship. Your pay, or the promise of it, jingled in your head like a song you couldn't stop humming. 2 months out, 2 months back, they said. Enough silver to drink yourself into oblivion for a season or 2. And maybe, just maybe, a taste of whatever riches lay waiting in those uncharted waters, if the captain's stories had any truth to them. Life aboard ship began the moment your feet hit the deck. No easing in, no warm welcome, just the barked orders of the boatswain and the creak of the rigging in the wind. You were hauling lines before you'd even learned which end of the ship was which, and by nightfall your hands were already blistered raw. Salt spray stung your eyes, and the deck rolled under you like a drunkard trying to shake you off his shoulders. You discovered quickly that a ship isn't a home, it's a stomach. Everything inside it is constantly shifting, grinding, and groaning, and you're just another morsel being digested by the voyage. Columbus himself wasn't what you expected. He didn't look like a hero, or a madman, or whatever strange mixture you'd imagined. He looked like a man who'd convinced himself of something so completely that it didn't matter if it was true or not. His eyes scanned the horizon like it was an opponent he intended to defeat, and his voice carried that particular tone that doesn't ask for agreement, only obedience. You didn't talk to him, not directly, because men like you don't talk to men like him unless you're being punished or rewarded, and neither had happened yet. The first days were a strange kind of purgatory. You were still in sight of land, the wind was fair, and no one had begun to doubt the journey yet. The food, salted pork, hardtack, dried peas, was still edible in that it hadn't yet sprouted weevils, and the water in the casks was still water, not the green living soup it would become. You kept your head down, did your work, and learned the rhythm of the ship. Dawn meant swabbing decks, hauling sails, and cursing quietly at the sun for rising again. Midday meant choking down whatever the cook's mate slapped into your bowl. Evening meant pulling your blanket tight around you and listening to the sea slap against the hull like a slow, patient heartbeat. But under it all was that creeping awareness that every wave you passed took you farther from the shore, farther from the world you understood, and deeper into the gamble you'd signed up for. You didn't know if you'd return, and though you told yourself you didn't care, you found your eyes drifting toward the horizon more often than they should, wondering if it was looking back. The port grew smaller each day until it was nothing but a memory, and then even that began to fade. The routine hardened around you like the planks of the hull, shift changes, watch rotations, endless chores that made your muscles ache and your mind drift. You learned the names of the other men, though not always their faces. Sun, salt, and the sameness of shipboard life made everyone look like a variation of the same tired, wind-battered sailor. There were arguments, of course. Too many bodies in too small a space, tempers frayed by hunger and heat. But there were also moments in the quiet nights when the stars stretched out overhead in a way you'd never seen on land, cold and brilliant, as if you could step from the rigging and walk straight into them. And then came the day you left the last sight of land behind. The coastline faded into a faint line, then a smudge, then nothing at all. The ship creaked, the sails swelled, and the water around you was all there was. Some men crossed themselves, others spat into the sea for luck. You just stood there, one hand on the rail, feeling the pull in your stomach that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement. The journey had truly begun, and there would be no turning back until the ocean decided to let you go. The ocean doesn't change much when you've been staring at it for a week straight, but you do. Your shoulders begin to slope like the deck itself. Your legs sway when you stand still, and you start to measure your days not in hours, but in tasks. The endless, grinding tasks that make up a sailor's existence. If you're lucky, the work keeps your mind busy. If you're unlucky, it leaves enough quiet for the doubt to creep in. A week after losing sight of land, the men stop talking about home. Not because they've forgotten it, but because speaking of it feels like summoning something too heavy to carry in such a cramped space. Instead, conversations shrink to the here and now. The wind, the sails, the food, the captain's mood. It's safer to argue about the weather than about whether you'll ever see your own bed again. Meals have already turned mean. The salted pork is tougher now, the peas softer in the wrong way, and the hardtack has begun its slow transformation into a kind of edible masonry that you must break with the butt of a knife before daring to chew. The water, too, is changing. Still drinkable, but with that faint taste of wood and age that promises worse to come. You drink it anyway. Thirst doesn't wait for perfection. Columbus holds himself apart. You catch glimpses of him at the helm, or poring over charts in his cramped quarters, a candle guttering beside him as if it too were exhausted by the journey. The officers cluster around him like barnacles on a rock, tight-lipped and serious, and whatever passes between them doesn't trickle down to men like you. Orders are barked, ropes are hauled, sails are trimmed. The why of it remains above your pay. Nights on the open ocean are their own kind of haunting. The air cools, the creak and sigh of the ship grows louder, and the sky above you looks less like something to navigate by and more like a reminder of how much nothing there is out here. You've heard stories of men who went mad staring too long into the night sea, convinced they could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Great shadows, sliding just out of sight, keeping pace with the ship. You tell yourself it's nonsense, but you don't lean too far over the rail either. The first storm comes without much warning. One moment the wind is playful, tugging at your hair and filling the sails with a steady pull. The next, the sky is a bruised wall and the sea rises up like it's decided you've overstayed your welcome. Orders are shouted until they blur together, and you cling to the rigging with hands that burn from rope burn and salt. The ship pitches, water slaps across the deck, and you learn the difference between being wet and being soaked into your bones. By morning, the storm has passed, but you've lost a barrel of provisions to the waves, and 2 men nurse injuries that may or may not heal right. You don't talk about how close it felt. After that, the mood changes. There's a new edge to the laughter, a sharper tone to the grumbling. Men count the days by scratches in the wood, but out here, days are meaningless. You could be a week from landfall or a month from starving, and the horizon wouldn't tell you the difference. Columbus still talks to the officers with that same burning certainty, but you can feel the quiet doubt spreading like mildew in the hold. It's not all misery. There are moments, brief but real, when the sea is calm and the wind is kind, when the ship slides across the water as smoothly as a gull's shadow. On those days, the men sing, not all together, not as a choir, but in fragments. A verse from one voice, a bawdy chorus from another, a whistle that wanders from mast to mast. You find yourself humming along, and for a few minutes you can almost believe this is adventure rather than gamble. But the ocean has its own rhythm, and it doesn't care for yours. Soon enough, the calm ends and the endless blue returns to pressing in on all sides. You begin to dream of green, not the rolling hills of home, but any green at all. Grass, moss, even weeds between cobblestones. You wake to nothing but blue and white, until it feels like those colours are all the world has left. By the second week, the ship smells different. Sweat and tar have been joined by something more sour, more human, the scent of too many bodies sharing too little air, of damp clothes that will never truly dry, of the subtle rot of provisions that are meant to last but never quite do. You stop noticing after a while, not because it fades, but because you do. Arguments flare more often now, not about the voyage itself, not yet, but about hammocks too close together, about who took whose portion, about a knot tied wrong or a line left slack. You learn to keep your head down, not because you fear the fights, but because you fear the silence afterward even more. Men can forgive a bruise, they don't forgive suspicion. Every now and then, you catch yourself watching the horizon with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. You imagine the shape of land rising from the sea, the shock of green against all this blue, the taste of fresh water that hasn't sat in a cask for weeks. But the horizon stays empty, and you learn the cruelest truth of the ocean. It can stretch forever without changing, and you'll still sail on it because the only way out is forward. When the wind dies, you discover a new kind of misery. The ship stops moving, but the work doesn't. The sails must still be tended, the deck swabbed, the lines checked. The sun beats down until the deck planks grow hot enough to burn bare skin, and the air thickens with the smell of the bilge. You pray for wind, even bad wind, and when it finally comes, you thank it without asking where it might take you. In these moments, you start to understand that the voyage isn't just about crossing an ocean. It's about crossing yourself. The you who thought you knew what hardship was. The you who thought you could measure risk in coin. The you who believed that adventure was something you could drink to at the end of the day. Out here, there's no end of the day. There's only the sea, the ship, and the work. Always the work. You stop counting days, not because the number frightens you, but because it bores you, which is somehow worse. Time stops being a rope you can tie knots in and becomes water. And you can't hold water. You can only drown in it slowly while pretending the taste is refreshing. So you mark the passing of life by smaller things instead. How many biscuits you have to hammer against the mast before they surrender. How many times the boatswain's whistle shrieks during the middle watch. How many new blisters introduce themselves to your hands each time the sheets need hauling in a hurry, which is always. Men change shape under these conditions. Shoulders stoop into the ship's curve. Legs learn to sway in doorways as if the floor were negotiating. Faces grow a salt varnish that never entirely scrubs off. And the eyes go narrow at the horizon, the way a hungry cat looks at a door you haven't opened yet. Conversations shrink to defensible ground, the wind, the lines, the cook's crimes. No one speaks of home anymore unless they want trouble, because home is a word that pulls too hard on the rest of the sentence and drags it into silence. And silence is where you can hear your stomach and your fear hold a whispered argument about whose turn it is to complain. You learn to be grateful for small noises, tar bubbling in a pot, a gull that got lost, the friendly blasphemy of a man who's barked his shin, because they remind you that there's still a world that isn't only water and order words. Nights are their own kind of tyranny. The sky is a whetstone that sharpens loneliness and the sea turns black. The way iron turns black in a forge, and you stand your watch. trying not to imagine shapes underneath, long and patient, keeping pace, the ocean's quiet accountants. The storm that teaches everyone manners arrives like a debt collector who doesn't knock. The world tilts, the sky comes down to introduce itself, and you discover that a deck can be vertical for longer than you thought, that rope burns taste metallic when salt gets into them, that a man can pray with his teeth while shouting with his hands, and that barrels float just long enough to make you feel the loss. By dawn, the rage is spent. The sea goes back to pretending it's reasonable, and two men are suddenly old from their injuries, and a third stares at the horizon with the fixed politeness of someone who's decided never to be surprised again. After that, something cracks, not loudly, but usefully. Grumbling acquires a spine. The word mutiny is not spoken, because words like that have a smell and officers have noses, but phrases begin to lean, and questions start arriving already sharpened. How far? How long? How sure? A petty officer keeps his hand on his knife too easily. An old pilot claims the compass is sulking. A cabin boy disappears for an hour and returns with a face that has been taught something by a bosun's rope end. You notice how the ship invents new silences, the kind men wear when Columbus passes, the kind officers adopt when they have decided to be loyal to the voyage and not the men sailing it. Food is a joke that got mean. The pork is an interpretation of meat. The peas are nostalgia pretending to be vegetables. And the hardtack needs a legal intermediary before it'll agree to be chewed. Water tastes increasingly like the barrel decided to contribute. You watch the cook chase weevils out of a sack. Watch two of them refuse to be chased. Watch a third get eaten defiantly because at a certain point, dignity is a garnish no one can afford. Teeth loosen, tempers don't. You learn which man takes his portion slow and which man counts other men's portions faster than he should. You learn how to sleep with your hand on a knife without dreaming about it. The wind dies for 3 days and you find out that stillness can feel more dangerous than motion. The sails hang like a sulk. The sea forgets to breathe and the deck becomes a skillet on which your patience turns to ash. Work goes on because work is what prevents thinking. You scrub boards that have been scrubbed into confession already. You splice line that didn't ask to be spliced. You oil blocks that shriek anyway, and every chore whispers the same sermon. The only way out is forward, and forward is not cooperating. The boatswain invents tasks with the cheerful malice of a man who refuses to be bored, and men argue about how to coil a rope as if the rope were listening and taking notes. The first, land, is a falsehood told by a cloud that learned the shape of a hill. The man on the masthead sings it down like a psalm, and the deck erupts with the kind of hope that should be rationed. But you've been here long enough to know better than to spend your belief too early. You squint, and you see nothing but the trick of light on water, the horizon's usual lie. When the truth reveals itself, a smear of grey that refuses to sharpen, you avoid eye contact with the men who already tasted sand in their mouths. And you file the disappointment in the same locker as you keep your spare shirt and your best curses. Columbus handles it professionally. He neither promises nor apologizes, which is the kind of leadership that keeps a crew furious and working. The days lengthen by getting narrower. Men whisper under the booms where the officers don't go, and the whisper sounds like a saw, long strokes, steady pressure. A helmsman mutters that the admiral, he says the word with a clever little angle, doesn't steer by the stars so much as by the story he wants to tell. A caulker says it doesn't matter. A story that pays is better than a truth that doesn't. A mariner with too many scars on his hands says he'd like to be paid in anything that isn't promises. You note who's talking and who's collecting, because on a ship, information is a currency that weighs nothing and buys everything. Then comes the morning when the wind turns obliging, the sea pretends to be a road, and morale, unreliable animal that it is, sits up and begs. The cry again, from high and forward, and this time it isn't a note but a chord. More voices, layered, urgent, the kind of sound that grabs a man by the ribs. You run to the rail with the others and you see what you didn't allow yourself to see before. The line is darker, thicker, a deliberate mark. You don't cheer, not out loud, because you know joy is skittish, but something in your shoulders remembers how to be lighter. Columbus appears with the helpful serenity of a saint who rehearsed, accepts the glass, looks longer, and then says the only two words that matter: full sail, which is how you know he's either right or all in, and in either case, your job is the same. Canvas blooms, yards creak, blocks chatter, the ship accelerates like a rumour finally given permission, and men move faster than they have moved in a month because hope works on muscles the way fear works on eyes. Everything dilates. The hours that follow belong to fever. The deck becomes a market for plans. First drink, first prayer, first argument, first woman, first bath, first sin you're willing to repeat. And the promises are as extravagant as the breath that carries them. One man swears he'll kiss the ground. Another swears he'll never touch ground again without a priest watching. A third invents a speech for the king he will certainly meet. You stay out of it, not because you lack imagination, but because you've learned how expensive it is to spend it in advance. You busy your hands with jobs that don't need doing twice, because anxiety is a horse that needs leading. Dusk builds the world slower than you want. The line refuses to become a coastline until the light is almost done, and then, like a debt finally acknowledged, it deepens into shape. Not cloud, not trick. Something with edges, something that stays when you rub your eyes. The ship sighs in a way wood sighs when it knows a long argument is about to be over. Men cross themselves boldly, the kind of crossing that can be seen by officers and fate both. Others spit into the sea and call it a bargain. Night does not cancel land. It hides it behind the lamp of stars and lets your mind do the rest, which is worse. Watches drag because they are now guarding a thing they can't yet touch. You lie in your hammock and listen to the ship negotiate with the dark, and you conduct the quiet arithmetic no sailor admits. What the shore might give, what it will cost, and who will be prodded to go first when the boats go over the side. You sleep the way a door sleeps in a wind, hinged, busy, never all the way. Dawn is a ceremony performed without permission. The sky peels back one layer at a time, and there it is, no longer a theory. Green where your eyes had forgotten green existed, sand like a bright memory, palms like gossip in a breeze you can't yet feel. A broken crown of surf writes the shoreline's name in a script you can finally read. The ship falls quiet in the new kind of way. This silence has weight, expectancy, a pulse. Columbus prays aloud, officers answer like choir, and a sailor near you grins with half his teeth and says he remembers how to walk. You don't, not at first. When the boats are lowered and your name is called among the oarsmen, your legs pretend the deck is still under them, and the boat rocks their lie into the water. The oars bite, the brine slaps, the beach sizes you up. The air close to the ground smells like the end of a fast. You hear birds, real birds, not the ocean's few, and the sound is disrespectful to every ration you have eaten. The first man to jump over the bow to wade the last yards does so with a shout so large it startles him, and everyone laughs because it feels like his lungs belong to all of you. Sand holds you like an old friend who isn't sure you remember their name. Your feet forget shoes and remember feet. You kneel because your knees insist, and you put your hand into the earth and it feels like you've been forgiven for something, which is absurd. But there it is. Columbus does the things a man must do to make kings and priests happy. Banners raised, names given to things that didn't ask, prayers spoken loudly enough to be heard by memory. Officers look official, sailors look relieved, and somewhere behind the noise the island watches you the way a patient watches a doctor entering the room with new instruments. You notice details because the body is greedy after famine. Leaves move like they have conversations. Fruit glows indecently on branches as if the sun were inside it. The breeze carries spices you can't name and the wet honesty of plant life. Fresh water is found and praised, tasted and fought over, cupped in hands and baptized with faces. The cook cries, which improves him. Then there are people. They appear without the ceremony you expected, quiet and curious at the forest's edge, not hiding well because there's no tradition for hiding from men who arrive out of arithmetic. They are not monsters, not the map's decorations, not the stories you were told to keep you brave. They are exactly what you are from a different angle. Men with tools, women with work, children with better things to do than be impressed. You and they regard one another across a small piece of sand that weighs the same as a mile, and in that stretch of space you can feel all the misunderstandings that history has in stock hurry forward to be chosen. Gifts are the first language. You are told to smile with your hands, to show metal like magic, to show cloth like weather. They show feathers arranged like prayers and shells that have learned to be jewelry and food that laughs at your rations. Words try to make themselves useful and fail politely. Gestures take the job. You discover that pointing is international and that laughter, when it hears itself echoed, becomes a treaty for 5 minutes at a time. Somewhere behind you, men unload, measure, make lists, decide. Somewhere before you, men and women watch the lists being made and decide other things. And because men are an untidy species, there is also clumsiness. A sailor reaches for something he should have admired first. A child touches a blade that was meant to be a promise, not a threat. An officer's posture translates badly into a language that has no word for officer. The moment tightens and then relaxes. Someone laughs, a bird shouts, a wave takes responsibility, and the day remembers it wants to be about discovery rather than correction. You file the moment under warnings and keep your hands visible. Columbus speaks of God and sovereigns and purpose, and you think of shade and water and whether there is a place to sleep that isn't a plank that knows your bones too well. He has maps that can be persuaded to admit they were wrong. You have calluses that are delighted to discover they still have a future. Men build a cross because that is what they were told a cross does. Announce, occupy, excuse. Men fill barrels because barrels are honest. Men stake and tally, promise and estimate. The island endures all of this with the patience of a thing that was here yesterday and expects to be here tomorrow. When the sun lowers, that handsome liar, the boats shuttle you back with loads that clink and drip and rustle. The ship smells different after only a day. The odour of green has climbed aboard. The galley hisses with new confidence, and men hold fruit like trophies and women's laughter like prophecy. You eat until your stomach remembers how, and you lie in your hammock staring at the darkness between the deck beams and you think, the world is larger than the priest said, and stranger than the old pilots threatened, and you are now a man who has stepped from the edge of a map onto a thing that has its own edges. You fall asleep to the sound of men arguing about names to give to things that already had them, and wake to the reality that names once nailed up are harder to pull down than sails in a squall. The next days will be busier than the sea ever was. Scouting, trading, misunderstanding, christening, writing, and the gentle, dangerous business of deciding who these people are in the story you will sell when you return. But that's tomorrow's arithmetic. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, you do not dream of falling. You dream of walking. You learn quickly that the shore is less forgiving than the sea, and you didn't exactly think the sea was generous. On the ship, you at least knew the rules. Don't drown, don't mutiny too obviously, don't be the slowest to grab a line when a squall hits. But land invents its rules daily without telling anyone, and the first one seems to be this: nothing stays where you put it. You drive a stake into sand to mark a boundary, and the tide comes to collect it like unpaid rent. You stack crates in neat rows, and the wind redistributes them like gossip. You pitch a tent, and the ground underneath chooses to be water during the night. Nature here is less a backdrop and more an opinionated landlord. The first camp is drawn on the beach in lines of logic that last exactly 3 days before they're redrawn by necessity, then by accident, and finally by that strange human impulse to build something crooked and call it permanent. Tents lean into each other like drunks in the wind. Fire pits breed in unplanned places. The cook's shelter ends up downwind of the latrine purely by the democratic power of inattention. Officers talk about order with the same solemnity priests use for salvation, and the men nod while moving their belongings to wherever the shade happens to be. You discover that unloading a ship is less about speed and more about making the same complaint in new ways. Barrels slosh their secrets reluctantly, crates refuse to be lifted without exacting a toll in splinters. Rope handles snap just when you start trusting them. The small boat runs back and forth from ship to shore like a servant too afraid to quit. On each trip, something falls overboard, and whether or not anyone jumps in to fetch it depends entirely on how much they value it, or how much they enjoy the idea of someone else going without it. You begin to suspect that cargo has its own politics. Trading with the locals starts as theatre and quickly turns into a kind of slow-motion knife fight in which no one bleeds but everyone suspects they've been cut. You are told to smile a lot, even when you don't mean it, which turns out to be most of the time. Metal is worth more than it should be. Cloth is worth exactly what it should be, and the beads you thought were magical currency earn you polite confusion at best. They bring food that makes the ship's rations look like acts of cruelty, fruit that tastes like someone remembered what sweetness was, meat that isn't salted into misery, roots that feel honest in your mouth. And you, in return, give them things that look suspiciously like weapons and tools, though everyone pretends otherwise. The conversations are mostly pointing and shrugging, which, as it turns out, is the most efficient form of diplomacy. There is a moment, somewhere in the second week, when you realize the ship is no longer the center of the story. The officers spend more time on land than on deck. The captain, the admiral, holds court under a makeshift awning, issuing proclamations about land claims and divine providence, while a clerk scratches them into paper with an expression that suggests he's already imagining the arguments these words will cause back home. The sailors who used to resent being sent ashore now linger there as long as possible, because on land you can at least walk away from the man you're angry with, whereas on a ship you can only stare at him until one of you moves first. Work multiplies like lies. You are ordered to fell trees for timber, but the trees here seem to have been designed to humiliate axes. You dig trenches that immediately decide to be streams. You carry water from a spring that insists on being farther away every time you go. At night, you fall asleep to the sound of men cursing in 3 languages, sometimes at each other, sometimes at the land, sometimes at the mosquitoes that have claimed your ears as a colony. Your dreams, when they bother to show up, are filled with the suspicious quiet of forests. The locals, who you've started to recognize as people rather than set pieces, visit in patterns you don't yet understand. Some days they arrive in numbers with baskets and smiles, and the exchange feels almost like friendship. Other days they send only a few men, quiet and watchful, and the air feels tight as a rope being pulled from both ends. You don't know if the difference is weather, politics, or something invisible to you, but you've learned not to ask. Questions, like debts, are easy to acquire and hard to pay back. One night, a rumor slides through camp like a snake under a blanket. Someone says the locals have been watching from the tree line at night, counting your fires, your men, your weapons. Someone else says they've seen signs of other visitors, different footprints, cut branches, a spear left where no one should have left it. The officers laugh in public and double the watch in private. You start sleeping with your knife closer to your hand, not because you think you'll need it, but because you'd rather have it when you decide you do. The first real trouble comes dressed in the clothes of a misunderstanding. A group of your men, returning from a hunting trip with more swagger than meat, stumble into a village you hadn't known existed. They return with baskets of food that were gifted in the same way a tide gives you back something it took. It's yours again, but only because it was finished with it. The next day, a group of locals walks into camp without smiles, and the pointing this time is sharper. The admiral makes speeches, the interpreter sweats, and everyone pretends the resolution was mutual, though the eyes on both sides keep taking inventory. By the third week, the camp has its own hierarchy. The admiral and officers sit at the top, obviously, but beneath them, there are the favoured men, the ones who get the easier work, the better rations, the less dangerous errands. Then there are the rest of you, the ones who sweat and haul and get called resourceful when you fix something without being told how. It's not so different from the ship, except here the ladder feels less stable, as if the rungs are tied with rope that someone could cut in the night. Sickness arrives without the drama of a storm, just a man coughing in the wrong way, then another, then a fever that clings to the skin like damp cloth. The locals seem to recognize it and keep their distance. You don't know if it's something you brought or something you found here, but it travels faster than orders and respects no rank. The clerk records deaths in his neat hand, and the graves multiply at the edge of camp in a way that feels too organized to be natural. You stop counting after the 10th. In between the work and the wariness, there are still moments when the land tries to seduce you. A sunrise over the water that makes you forget the ache in your hands. The smell of rain on soil instead of salt on wood. The way firelight turns faces into something ancient and unrecognizable. You catch yourself thinking, for the smallest dangerous moment, that you could stay here. Then you remember the looks on the locals' faces when they watch you build fences. By the end of the first month, the ship is a memory that smells like pitch and mildew, and the camp is the reality that smells like smoke and sweat. You've learned to read the forest's noises, to tell the difference between the thump of a falling branch and the tread of a man who doesn't want to be seen. You've learned which officer will share his wine and which will share his wrath. You've learned that New World is just a phrase that means Old World, inconveniently rearranged. And you've learned, perhaps most importantly, that you are still very much a guest here. And guests, no matter how confident, are only welcome as long as the hosts decide they are. It starts the way rot always starts, quiet, under the surface, ignored until the smell becomes too obvious to pretend about. The trades grow slower. What used to be baskets of food now arrive as handfuls, the smiles thin like old cloth. The locals don't come every day anymore, and when they do, they bring more eyes than goods. The officers still talk about mutual benefit, but the men in camp have stopped calling it that. They call it waiting to see how much they can get away with, though they don't specify which side they mean. The admiral insists nothing is wrong, which you know means something is. His voice has developed that hard edge it gets when reality refuses to play along with the speeches. He talks about establishing a permanent presence in the same way a farmer talks about convincing the soil to grow more. It's not a conversation, it's an ultimatum. You've seen this before, not here, but everywhere men with titles meet land they didn't earn. The place is theirs the moment they decide it should be, and everything after is just paperwork. The first real demand comes dressed in politeness, the way all dangerous things do. One morning, a group of locals arrives carrying bundles of food, but before handing them over, their leader, older, his face carved into deep, unmoving lines, points to the crates of tools stacked near the camp's edge. He speaks, the interpreter hesitates, and the admiral frowns. "They want iron," the interpreter says at last. "Good iron, not scraps." The admiral gives them what he calls a token of goodwill, which is to say, less than they asked for, but enough to pretend it's a fair trade. They leave without smiles. After that, every trade feels heavier. The goods you give away are the ones you know you can't easily replace. The goods you receive come with the taste of obligation. One officer says the locals are testing the limits. Another says they're organizing. Neither sounds wrong, and both sound like trouble. The men grow restless. Work doesn't stop, but it changes. You notice that when the locals are near, fewer tools are left lying around. The watch at night starts keeping an eye not just on the forest, but on the camp itself. You hear mutters about keeping what's ours, which, if you think about it too long, starts to sound uncomfortably like something you might have heard from the locals if you understood their words. Then one afternoon, It happens. A boat from the ship, loaded with supplies, comes ashore. 2 barrels of grain, a small cask of wine, and a chest of nails. Before the crew can haul it past the tree line, a group of locals steps into their path. Not many, maybe a dozen, but enough. They stand there, saying nothing at first, just looking. Then one of them speaks, and even without translation, you understand. They're not asking to trade this time. They're telling. The Admiral tries to handle it the way he handles everything, loudly, with hand gestures large enough to be seen from the ship. The interpreter's voice cracks trying to keep up. The locals don't raise their voices, but their words feel sharper than the axes leaning against your tent. When it's over, the grain is still yours, the nails too, but the cask of wine has changed hands without a single coin, bead or tool being offered in return. The Admiral calls it a necessary concession. The men call it being robbed politely. After that, the forest feels different. Not darker exactly, but closer. You see movement at the edge of your vision more often. You hear branches break at odd hours. The air smells heavier, like the seconds before a storm, when even the birds hold their breath. The trouble comes to a head one night when 3 men don't return from a hunting trip. At first, the officers assume they've gotten lost, which is a polite way of saying they're probably dead. Then, the next morning, the missing men walk into camp, bloodied, limping, and missing most of their gear. They say they were surrounded, disarmed, and sent back alive, as a warning. No one asks what the warning was. No one needs to. The Admiral holds a meeting, which is to say, he talks and everyone else listens. He says the camp will show strength and remind our hosts of the benefits of cooperation. You've been alive long enough to know those are just other ways of saying, we're going to take something they won't want to give. The men exchange looks that aren't agreement so much as resignation. You wonder how many of them will actually follow through when the time comes, and how many will suddenly find reasons to be somewhere else. 2 days later, the reminder happens. A party of men, armed and instructed to negotiate firmly, walks into the forest toward one of the villages. You're not part of it, not officially, but you're close enough to hear the shouting when it starts. The shouting stops abruptly, replaced by the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. When they return, they have more food than you've seen in weeks. They also have eyes that won't meet yours. That night, the locals don't come. The forest is quiet in the wrong way, the way it gets when predators are near. The watch doubles, then triples. The Admiral says everything is under control. You've heard that before too. By the end of the week, the camp is split between 2 kinds of men. The ones who think this is the beginning of a war, and the ones who think it's the middle. You're not sure which group you belong to. You only know that the new world has started to look very much like the old one, full of lines drawn in the dirt, then crossed anyway. It begins not with a battle, but with the absence of noise. No laughter from the men, no calls from the locals, no clatter of tools or haggling over beads and nails. Just wind through the trees and the slap of the tide against the shore, like the land itself is deciding whether or not to spit you back into the ocean. You wake to find the watch already doubled again, not because anyone ordered it, but because no one wants to be the one who misses the moment when everything finally comes apart. The first real break happens on a Wednesday. Not that the days mean much here. A small group goes to fetch water from the stream and doesn't come back. Not late, not limping, not at all. By the time the search party returns, they've found the barrels, empty, tipped over in the mud, and nothing else. No tracks that make sense, no blood, just the sense that someone was close enough to touch them and decided not to leave fingerprints. You don't need the interpreter to tell you what it means. You're not in charge of this ground anymore. The Admiral responds the way men like him always do, with noise, with orders, with the performance of control. The muskets are inspected twice over. Powder rations are adjusted. Men who have never in their lives stood a proper watch are given night shifts and told to be vigilant, which is a nice way of saying, don't fall asleep and wake up dead. But the truth slides around camp like smoke. You can't watch all directions at once, and the forest has more eyes than you have bullets. 2 nights later, it happens again. This time, it's the hunters, the ones who know how to move quiet and carry steel like they mean it. They make it back, but barely. 2 of them carried between the others, each with an arrow snapped off inside the meat of their legs. They say they never saw the shooters, only heard the hiss of the shafts a second before they hit. No demands, no parley. Just the kind of violence that doesn't need an audience. That's when the camp changes shape. The lines between soldier and sailor dissolve, between worker and fighter, until everyone is just a man holding on to whatever sharp thing he can find. Tents are pulled closer together, fires burn lower at night, and the food is kept so close to the admiral's quarters you'd think it was treasure. Which, here, it might as well be. The skirmishes don't come like storms, they come like sickness. Small symptoms first, then worse ones, then the day you can't get out of bed without feeling it in your bones. A stolen crate of nails here, a missing goat there. Then a sentry's body found slumped against the palisade with an arrow through his throat, his musket still loaded. That's when the admiral calls it what it is, though only to the officers: war. And yet, it's a war fought in the cracks. No grand clashes in the open, no lines of men trading volleys across a field. Just shadows where there shouldn't be shadows, fires on the horizon that vanish when you get close, and the sound of voices in a language you can't understand, too far away to answer and too close to ignore. Every trip into the forest feels like a gamble you can't win forever. Every return is half victory, half reprieve. Food starts to taste different when you're not sure where the next meal will come from. Salted meat is harder now, bread is smaller, and no one mentions the weevils because at least they mean there's still something left to eat. Water is boiled twice, sometimes 3 times, because no one trusts anything that hasn't been under your own fire. Men get leaner in the face and sharper in the eyes. You've seen this before, too. It's what people look like when they stop expecting rescue. One morning, a man from your own crew vanishes. No locals involved, no forest ambush, just gone. Took a musket, some powder, and half a sack of flour with him. Maybe he's hiding in the forest. Maybe he's trying to barter his way into another camp. Maybe he's already dead. The admiral calls him a deserter, but you can't help thinking he might just be a man who understood the odds better than the rest of you. By now, the lines have blurred so badly, you start to forget why you came here at all. Was it trade, land, glory, or just because someone with more gold than sense said you should? None of it feels real anymore. Not the promises, not the speeches, not the idea that there was ever going to be a moment when the locals and the crew sat down at the same table without one hand on a weapon. What feels real is the tension in your back every time you step outside the camp. What feels real is the way your fingers curl tighter around your blade at night. The breaking point comes during what should have been a routine run to the stream. 2 guards, 3 barrels, nothing unusual. You're not on the party, but you hear it, a single musket shot, then 2 more in quick succession, then silence so deep it makes your ears ring. The barrels come back, but only one of the guards, and he's carrying the other's musket. Says he never saw where the arrows came from. Just that 1 second, his friend was walking, and the next he was gone, pulled into the green like the earth itself decided to swallow him. That night, the admiral makes a choice. No more half measures, no more concessions. At dawn, a party will march into the largest village, not to talk, but to take. The men don't cheer. They just nod, because they already know this was always where it was going to end. You don't sleep that night. You sit by the dying fire, turning over the same thought until it feels like a prayer. Tomorrow, someone will die, and you can't say yet whether it will be you, or them, or both. The tide's coming in, the sky's gone black, and the forest is listening. The raid does not feel like triumph. It feels like breaking into someone's home while they're still inside. You move through the village with the others, the smell of smoke already sinking into your clothes, and you can't decide which is louder, the crack of musket fire or the sound of people running away from it. No speeches, no declarations, no neat line drawn between the guilty and the unlucky. Just motion, noise, and the kind of chaos that leaves you wondering if anyone will remember who swung first. By the time the sun is high, it's over. The village is a shell, the people scattered into the forest, and the only things left standing are the huts you didn't have time to burn. The Admiral calls it a victory in that clipped voice of his, the one that tries to sound like command and ends up sounding like exhaustion. But when the spoils are laid out, grain, a few tools, a scattering of trinkets, you can see in his face that this was never about what you'd gain. It was about proving you could take it. The days after taste different. Men speak quieter, laugh less, and keep their weapons closer at hand, as though waiting for the forest to answer. And it does. Not with a battle, but with absence. No more friendly calls from the tree line, no more curious faces by the stream, no more chance encounters that could turn into trade. Just an emptiness, heavy as the heat, that tells you the ground you stand on has already decided you don't belong. Weeks pass and the rhythm changes again. Not back to peace, not forward to conquest, but into something in between. A half-life where you're not quite settling and not quite surviving. The food runs low, the sickness creeps in, and more men start talking about the ships like they're the only real land left in the world. When you finally see the sails on the horizon, it feels like looking at a door that might be locked from the other side. Maybe it's rescue. Maybe it's just another round of orders from someone who's never walked barefoot through this dirt. Either way, you know you'll take it, because staying means being swallowed whole by a place that has already made up its mind about you. And so you leave, not with ceremony, not with banners, but with the quiet shuffle of boots on wet sand and the faint hope that the sea will forget your weight. The forest stays behind you, watching, holding on to the memory of your footsteps like it keeps all things that came here and failed to stay. Years later, if you talk about it at all, you talk about the sunsets, the salt air, the first sight of new land glinting in the morning light. You leave out the nights you couldn't sleep for the sound of the trees breathing. You skip the part where victory and loss felt exactly the same. You keep those for yourself, because no one wants a story about how the new world looked back at you and didn't blink. And maybe, if you're honest, you don't tell it because you still feel it. How the place got into your bones, how it refused to let you feel like the one who chose to leave. You sailed away, yes, but part of you stayed behind. In the silence after the musket stopped, in the clearing smoke, in the moment you realized the land had been yours for less than a heartbeat. That's the truth of it. You came for glory, you left with stories. And somewhere between the two, the world decided it could live without you. You don't wake up one morning and decide to become a gangster. That's the sort of decision people imagine in movies, when the rain is falling just right and the streetlight makes your cigarette glow like the start of something romantic. But in real life, it's slower, quieter, and far more boring. It begins with the kind of debts you can't pay, favors you can't return, and a sense of drifting so constant it starts to feel like the weather. By the time someone offers you a way out, you're not thinking about honor or loyalty or even survival. You're just tired of feeling like the weakest man in every room. The man who brings you in is not what you expect. No tattoos spilling out of his sleeves, no gold teeth, no cinematic menace. He wears a suit you've never seen in a store and moves like a man who knows the exact amount of space he's entitled to and will take it whether the world likes it or not. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't have to. You already know his name, because in your neighborhood, names travel faster than the police. He offers you tea first, because in this business, politeness is currency, and no one spends it carelessly. He asks about your family, not because he cares, but because he needs to know how deep the hooks will go if you decide to run. You answer honestly, because you're not yet smart enough to lie properly, and he nods like a man hearing the weather report. There is no contract, no oath under the moon. Just a job. Deliver this envelope to that address. Don't open it. Don't be late. Simple enough that you almost believe it's legitimate. And when you do it right, he calls you again. This time, it's a box instead of an envelope. Next time, it's a conversation in the back of a quiet bar, little steps, nothing illegal enough to draw attention, but just enough to make sure that if anyone ever asks, you can't quite explain what you've been doing. The first tattoo doesn't come until later. You're drunk when it happens, but not so drunk you don't understand what's being done to you. It's not just ink, it's a flag, a declaration, a lock on a door you didn't realize was closing. The needle bites, the ink spreads, and you think about the fact that from now on, your skin will speak before you do. Inside, the family is nothing like the rumors. There's no constant shouting, no wild nights, no endless parade of women and money. There is hierarchy, as strict and cold as the winter sea. You bow deeper to some men than others. You speak only when spoken to. You memorize who sits where, who pours whose drink, who never pours at all. Mistake that order and you'll spend the evening apologizing in ways that leave your knees aching. Your days are not glamorous. They're errands and collections, meetings and deliveries, and always the quiet hum of unspoken rules. You learn to read a room faster than you read a menu. You learn that silence can be more dangerous than anger. You learn that loyalty is not about friendship, but about understanding whose knife you're willing to fall on when the time comes. Outside, the world sees you differently. Shopkeepers are polite, sometimes too polite, and they never ask for exact change. Strangers avoid your eyes, which feels powerful until you realize it also means you've stopped being a person in their world. Police watch you longer than they watch anyone else. You stop going to certain places because you know your presence will draw questions no one wants to answer. The trouble is, every favor you do buys you a debt you can't repay. The boss lends you money you never asked for. A senior member bails you out of a fight you probably could have won. Someone gives you a gift on your birthday that costs more than anything you own. None of it is free, and all of it is remembered. And one day, when the ledger is full, they'll ask you for something you don't want to give, and you'll have no choice but to hand it over. The first time you see real violence, it's not in the street. It's in a small, clean room where two men sit across from each other at a low table. One speaks softly, the other listens, nods, and then, without raising his voice, slaps the man so hard you hear the skin split. No shouting, no chaos, just that single moment, like the air decided to turn solid for a second. The man who was hit doesn't fight back. He bows, apologizes, and leaves. You realize then that in this world, pain is not punishment, it's punctuation. The respect you gain is conditional. It exists only within the family, and even then, only as long as you play your role correctly. One mistake, real or imagined, and it evaporates like steam. You've seen men vanish from the table overnight, their names erased from conversation, their debts suddenly called in full. No one explains why, no one asks. The silence is as much a warning as any threat could be. And yet, for all of it, you stay, because the streets you came from have no place for you anymore, and the streets you're on now at least feel like they have rules. You've traded one kind of uncertainty for another, but this one pays in cash and keeps the rent on time. You tell yourself you'll find a way out before the tattoo becomes a sentence, but deep down you already know. You're in, and the only real exits are the kind no one walks through. At night, when the city quiets, you think about what they've really bought from you. Not your muscle, not your time, not even your loyalty. They've bought your reflection. The man in the mirror is not the boy who started this, and you can't remember exactly when he disappeared. You only know that if you ever see him again, it won't be here. They call it a family, and maybe that's true if you think of family as a group of people you didn't choose, who know exactly how to hurt you, and who will still show up with a bottle when you're at your lowest. There's an order to things here, more rigid than the lines painted on the street outside. You learn it not because anyone explains it to you, but because you watch the men who don't and see how quickly they disappear from meetings, their chairs suddenly occupied by someone younger, hungrier, and far less sentimental. There is the Oyabun, the father, though he isn't your father and never will be, no matter how many times you pour his drink or bow so low you feel your spine argue with you. His approval is a kind of currency, rare and dangerous to spend. Under him are the senior members, each with their own little kingdoms, territories, businesses, lines of trade that you're only allowed to touch if they say so. You're far down the ladder, the Kobun, a child in name if not in years, there to serve, to learn, and, when necessary, to take the fall. Your place is reinforced through rituals that look absurd to anyone on the outside, but carry weight like anchors here. There's the Sakazuki ceremony, where you kneel and drink sake with the Oyabun, the small cup passing back and forth, binding you in a relationship that's part oath, part trap. The first time you do it, your hands shake, not from fear, but from the understanding that the liquid in that cup is more binding than any rope. Punishments, too, have their rituals. You hear about yubitsume long before you see it, a missing joint on a man's little finger, the polite way others pretend not to notice. When it finally happens in front of you, it's quiet, almost clinical. A man who failed, lost money, disobeyed orders, lays a white cloth on the table, produces a knife, and removes a part of himself without so much as a cry. He presents it like an offering, a way to say, I understand my debt, and I am still loyal enough to hurt myself for you. You tell yourself you could never do it, but somewhere inside, you know the day might come. Daily life in the Yakuza is a mix of the mundane and the absurd. In the morning, you might be delivering envelopes or overseeing a gambling den, where old men argue over mahjong tiles. By afternoon, you're visiting shops in your territory, making sure everyone remembers why they pay what they pay. Some are friendly, offering tea or cigarettes. Others barely open the door, handing over the envelope with the kind of smile you give a storm, in hopes it will pass quickly. There are also the times you're told to simply be seen. You stand in certain places, near a bar that's been having trouble, outside a building someone else wants to buy, and you don't do anything. You just exist there, suit pressed, shoes polished, hands loose at your sides. Your job is to be a reminder, the human equivalent of a locked door with no keyhole. The respect you get from civilians is shallow. Some think you're glamorous, a walking legend, others think you're filth. Both are wrong, but you let them think what they want. What matters is that they keep their heads down when you pass and remember that your family's shadow falls over their lives, whether they see it or not. Inside the family, respect is something you bleed for. It's earned through obedience, patience, and an ability to endure the kind of boredom that could drive lesser men mad. The senior members test you constantly, not with fights or threats, but with errands designed to see if you'll do exactly what you're told, exactly how you're told, no matter how pointless it seems. Fail and you're replaced. Succeed and you're given something harder. The money is steady, but never quite yours. There's always a cut for the family, for your superior, for whatever collective expense happens to appear that month. You live better than most people in your old neighborhood, but you also know that if you disappear tomorrow, your apartment will be cleared out by evening, and your name will be remembered only in whispers. The police are a constant shadow, not the honest kind, that kind barely exists here, but the kind who smile when they see you, because they know they can't touch you unless your own family hands you over. You pay them, of course, though not directly. Payments move like water here, flowing from one set of hands to another, each step designed to make sure no one can quite prove where it began. Every so often, there's a gathering, not the drunken chaos of a festival, but a formal meeting where every seat is assigned, every bow measured, every word weighed. The Oyabun speaks little, but when he does, the room tilts to listen. You stand in the back, eyes forward, pretending not to notice the subtle exchanges, an extra pour of sake, a nod from one man to another. That means far more than anything said aloud. And then there are the jobs that aren't discussed in daylight. You hear the phone ring late at night, the voice on the other end giving you an address, a time, and nothing else. Sometimes it's a pickup, sometimes it's a delivery, and sometimes it's the kind of work you don't write down anywhere, the kind you carry in your memory until it fades enough that you can convince yourself it never happened. Over time, you realize the Yakuza isn't just an organization, it's a way of moving through the world. You learn to spot police before they see you, to tell when someone is lying just by the way they light their cigarette. You start to measure people not by what they say, but by what they leave unsaid. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to forget what life felt like before every step you took was part of someone else's design. At night, walking home through streets that feel like they belong to you, you understand the trap. You've traded the uncertainty of poverty for the certainty of belonging to something that will never truly let you go. It's not chains that bind you here. It's the knowledge that outside these walls, no one cares if you live or die, and inside them, at least, your absence would be noticed. It starts with something small, as it always does, the kind of errand you could do in your sleep. Meet a man, take an envelope, deliver it to another man, make sure no one follows you. You've done it 100 times, and it's never been anything more than a way to pass the afternoon, a stroll through the city with the added bonus of making yourself look busy to the people who notice such things. But this time, the man with the envelope doesn't show. Instead, it's someone you've never seen before, a face too clean, a suit too plain, and eyes that hold a little too steady when they meet yours. He smiles, not the polite smile of a shopkeeper, not the guarded smile of someone who knows you could ruin them, but something else, the smile of a man who has already decided how the next hour of your life is going to go and is just waiting for you to catch up. He hands you the envelope. No greeting, no explanation. You take it because that's your job, and because refusing it here in the middle of a public street would be like holding up a sign that says, "You don't belong." The first thing you notice is the weight, not the physical weight, paper doesn't weigh much, but the way it seems to settle into your hand like a stone dropped into a pond, sending ripples you can't quite see but can feel all the same. You put it inside your jacket, nod once, and walk away. That's the part anyone else would notice. You leaving. What they wouldn't see is the way your pace changes, how your mind starts drawing lines between this moment and every time you've heard about someone disappearing after a job like this. By the time you reach the drop point, your mouth is dry and your shirt sticks to your back. The man you're supposed to meet isn't there either. Instead, there's a car parked too neatly at the curb, engine idling. The driver doesn't look at you, just flicks his eyes to the back seat. You've seen enough films, hell, you've lived enough of them, to know that getting into that car could be the last decision you make, but standing here with the envelope feels worse. The car is at least an answer, even if it's the wrong one. Inside, the air smells of cigarettes and expensive cologne, the kind people wear when they want to make sure you remember them. The man next to you is older, his hair too dark to be natural, his suit so sharp it could take a finger off. He introduces himself with a name you're pretty sure is false, but you shake his hand anyway. The envelope is still in your jacket. He tells you to hand it over. You do. Then he says something you don't expect, that the family has enemies, and that sometimes those enemies look a lot like friends. That it's your job to decide which is which. That this envelope wasn't meant for where you were taking it. That you've just been given the chance to prove where your loyalties lie. You don't say anything, because there's nothing to say that won't sound like the wrong answer. The test is simple, at least on paper. Deliver this new envelope to a place that is most definitely not on the family's list of approved destinations, and don't tell anyone. If you do, they'll know. If you don't, they'll also know. Somewhere in there, between the words and the silences, is the real question. Are you loyal to the man whose drink you pour, or to the shadow that drinks first without ever showing its face? For days after, you live in a kind of suspended animation. Every time the phone rings, every time someone knocks at your door, you half expect it to be the end. You imagine the sound of your own shoes scraping across a warehouse floor, the metallic taste of fear in your mouth, the brief flare of a light bulb overhead before it all goes dark. You wonder if the Oyabun already knows, if he's just waiting to see whether you confess or choke on your own silence. You could tell him. You could walk into his office, bow low, and explain that you were set up, that you never meant to betray anyone, that you've always done your duty. You could watch his face for that tiny shift, approval, disappointment, or the blank stare that means he's already decided how to replace you. But you don't. Because in this life, truth isn't a shield. It's just another weapon, and the man holding it isn't you. Instead, you deliver the envelope. You don't ask what's inside, you don't linger, you don't look back. The man who takes it thanks you like you've done him a favor instead of just possibly ending your own career. Then you go home, make tea you don't drink, and sit in the dark until morning, waiting for something to happen. Nothing does, not right away. Days turn into weeks, and the silence becomes its own kind of torture. You see the Oyabun at a meeting, and he greets you exactly the same as always, which is to say, not at all. You begin to think maybe you've passed the test, whatever it was. Or maybe they're just waiting for the perfect moment, the kind that comes when you've almost convinced yourself you're safe. That moment arrives one rainy night, when you're called to the back room of a bar you've only been to once before. The man who gave you the envelope is there, smiling the same smile, only this time there's another man with him. One you know, one you've worked with, one who looks at you like you've just killed his dog. They talk around you at first, as if you're a piece of furniture. Then they talk to you, but it's not really talking. It's questions wrapped in statements, traps disguised as concern. They want to know what you told the Oyabun. They want to know who else you've spoken to. They want to know if you understand what loyalty means, and they don't wait for you to answer before telling you what it means to them. You listen, because listening is safer than speaking, but inside you feel something shift, not fear exactly. You've lived with that too long for it to surprise you, but the realization that you are now balancing on a knife's edge, and both sides are equally sharp. When you leave, the rain has stopped, but the streets are slick, reflecting the neon in broken patterns. You walk slower than usual, not because you're tired, but because you want to feel every step, to remind yourself that you're still here, still moving, still in the game. For now, you start to realize that in this world, loyalty isn't about honor. It's about leverage. The Oyabun doesn't need your respect. He needs your usefulness, and the moment those two diverge, you're as replaceable as a pair of bloodied gloves after a job gone wrong. But until that moment comes, you walk the tightrope. Every conversation is a test, every errand a measurement, every glance from a senior like a coin flipped in the dark. Could land on a smile, could land on a funeral. Your days settle into a rhythm that feels almost normal, if. Normal included routine violence and the constant hum of paranoia. Mornings start with errands, collecting payments from shop owners who know better than to be late, running envelopes that are never opened in your presence, fetching drinks for men who could decide your fate mid-sip. You keep your head bowed just enough to show respect, but not so much that they mistake you for weak. In this game, posture is currency. You learn the hierarchy quickly because mistakes here aren't corrected with gentle reminders. They're corrected with scars. The Oyabun sits at the top like a mountain, untouchable and unmoving. Beneath him, the Wakagashira, the underboss, keeps the machinery of the family running. Discipline, money, expansion. Then, the Kyodai, the big brothers, who command their own crews, and the Shate, the little brothers, like you, who do whatever they're told and pretend it's their calling. Everyone below you is a potential rival. Everyone above you is a potential executioner. The first time you're sent to handle something, you tell yourself it's just intimidation. A shopkeeper who's been late twice, muttering about bad business. You go in with two other Shati, your Oyabun's instructions simple. Remind him of his obligations. You think you know what that means until the bigger of your companions grabs the man by his collar and slams him into the wall so hard a shelf of canned goods crashes to the floor. You just stand there, holding the door, wondering if you're now complicit in something you can't undo. The answer, of course, is yes. Word travels fast in neighborhoods like this. A few days later, you notice people look at you differently. Not with respect, not exactly, but with the kind of caution you reserve for stray dogs that might bite. You've been marked, not just by the tattoo needle that will one day crawl across your skin, but by the invisible stain of your association. The police know your face now. So do rival families. So does the kid who sells sweet buns at the corner stall, who stops smiling when you approach. At night, when the bars close and the streets empty, the city belongs to people like you. You move through it like a ghost with a purpose, slipping in and out of alleys, trading whispers with other crew members, making deliveries that feel like secrets even when they're just crates of sake. You see things, deals going down under flickering neon, lovers meeting in the shadows, drunk salarymen stumbling into the wrong part of town and learning just how wrong it can be. You start to understand that the Yakuza don't just live in the city, they are the city's circulatory system, pumping money, fear, and influence through its veins. But there's friction, and you can feel it in the air. A rival family has been pushing into your territory. Not outright, not yet, but enough that the Oyabun has started holding more meetings, his lieutenants smoking faster, voices dropping to a lower register. Rumours filter down to your level, a gambling den raided, a girl from one of your brothels beaten by men no one recognises, an accidental fire in a warehouse that just happened to store your merchandise. Retaliation is inevitable. You just hope you're not picked to be the message. Of course you are. It's a Thursday night when your Kyodai tells you you'll be joining a small group for a visit. No details, just the time and place. You show up, heart already punching at your ribs, and find a black sedan idling in the shadows. You slide in, surrounded by faces you know only from the periphery. Older, harder men who speak in clipped syllables and carry the kind of calm that comes from long practice. One of them hands you a baseball bat. You don't ask questions. The target is a small nightclub tucked into a basement near the docks. A rival family's new foothold, supposedly. You pile out of the car, the night air thick with the salt of the harbour, and follow the others down the stairs. The door is unlocked. Inside, the music is low, the lights dim, and the bartender's smile freezes as he registers the tattoos peeking from your companions' collars. Then it's movement, quick, violent, chaotic, bottles shattering, chairs overturning, shouts mixing with the dull thud of fists on flesh. You swing the bat once, twice, not even sure who you're hitting, your ears ringing with the adrenaline rush that turns seconds into hours. When it's over, you're outside again, bat sticky, hand shaking. No one speaks on the drive back. You're dropped off 2 streets from your apartment, told to get rid of your clothes. You burn them in a rusted barrel behind a warehouse, the smoke curling into the night like a prayer no God would want to answer. Sleep doesn't come easy after that. You start noticing shadows that might not be shadows, footsteps that might be following you, cars that linger 1 block too long. You're more careful now about where you go, who you talk to, what you carry. Paranoia isn't a side effect here, it's survival. And then there's the matter of money. You make more now than you ever did hustling small time, but it goes fast. Gifts for the Oyabun, fines for mistakes you didn't realize you'd made, cuts for every man above you in the hierarchy. You learn that in this family, your earnings are never really yours. Still, you find ways to keep a little hidden. Not because you think you'll get out, no one really gets out, but because some nights, in the quiet between jobs, you let yourself imagine you could. The Oyabun calls you in one afternoon. His office smells of cedar and cigarette smoke, the air heavy with the silence of men who don't waste words. He looks at you for a long time before speaking. There's an opportunity, he says, something that requires discretion. Your stomach tightens. Opportunities in this world are just risks with better marketing. It's a delivery, not the kind you can make on foot. You're given a motorcycle, a leather satchel, and a route that winds through the industrial outskirts before ending in a private dockyard. No questions, no deviations. You ride fast, the city blurring into a smear of neon and rain. At the dock, a man you've never seen takes the satchel without a word. You turn to leave, and that's when you notice the other figures. 3 of them, standing in the shadows, their suits immaculate, their eyes cold. They're not yours, they're not friendly. You ride back with the wind pressing hard against your chest, the image of those faces etched into your mind. You don't tell anyone. You're not sure if it was a warning, a coincidence, or the start of something worse. By the time you reach home, you understand one thing with absolute clarity. In this life, every step forward takes you deeper into a place you can't map. And every favor you do is another thread tying you to men who will never let you go. You think you've learned the city's pulse, which alleys breathe out trouble, which intersections inhale sirens, which doors open when you knock twice and which never open at all. And then the tempo changes without warning, the downbeat shifts, and every familiar street becomes a test you didn't study for. It starts with the kind of incident that looks minor on paper and feels major in your bones. A gambling room of yours gets hit by men who didn't bother with masks because they wanted you to know exactly which family they belong to. The dealer is left with a broken wrist. The safe is left open like a mouth mid-scream, and the message is left everywhere in kicked chairs and blood-smeared tiles and a cigarette butt pressed into the tatami like a signature. You go to see the damage not because you need the sight, you already know what you'll find, but because absence in moments like this gets read as fear, and fear is a currency you can't afford to trade in. The oyabun doesn't shout. Men who can move pieces this big have learned that volume is for people without leverage. He calls the meeting in a room where the air has been trained to keep secrets, lacquered wood, heavy screens, tea that tastes like calm even when poured into hands that can't stop tightening. And he lets the silence work first, which is a kind of sermon, so by the time he speaks, the words arrive as law already half obeyed. Territory will be defended, money will be restored, face will be saved. You stand with the others along the wall and nod at the right seconds, and you try not to look like a man adding up how much blood this arithmetic usually costs. War here doesn't declare itself with banners, it leaks. A truck you use for moving boxes, no one inventories, gets pulled over 3 nights in a row by patrolmen who suddenly remember what regulations look like. A hostess bar loyal to you discovers it's in violation of a rule that didn't exist last week. A construction foreman who's been paying on time for years calls to say he's been offered protection at a discount by someone who doesn't sound like he takes no for an answer. You spend your days stitching holes you can't locate and your nights answering phones that ring like small explosions. The city, which used to feel like a pet you'd trained, starts acting like a god you've annoyed. The police don't need to pick a side to hurt you, and that's the genius of their timing. They show up where the noise is thickest with clipboards and cameras and that particular smile that says they've been waiting for this dance and you're not the first partner they've worn down. You watch a detective run a gloved finger along a bar top. You keep obsessively clean and tell the owner that health standards concern him deeply today. You watch a uniform lean in too close to a girl at the door and ask if she's safe. And you learn a new shade of anger, not the hot kind that escalates, but the cold kind that calculates. They don't want a fight, they want pressure, the steady hydraulic sort that forces cracks to declare themselves. Inside the family, the tests grow sharper. Your kyodai starts asking you to say back orders in your own words, not to make sure you heard, but to make sure you understood what wasn't being said. A senior who never noticed you before suddenly remembers your name and uses it twice in one sentence, which means he has a plan he doesn't want attached to him if it goes sideways. You spend more time with men whose knuckles are biographies and less time with men who file reports. You stop carrying your phone the same way because you realize phones are small, obedient detectives, and you don't remember when you gave them permission to follow you everywhere. Then comes the errand that isn't an errand, a visit to a warehouse near the river that supposedly belongs to no one, and therefore belongs to whoever has more men at midnight. You go in quiet, 4 of you. The kind of quiet that has practiced being loud later, boots rolling heel to toe across concrete that remembers other meetings, lights kept low, knives kept nearer than breath. There's a smell you can't place until you see the source. Engine oil, old rope, something metallic rusting under a tarp that refuses to keep secrets. You're there to leave a message that doesn't require grammar. Doors unhinged, locks made into jewelry, crates opened and left open like reminder notices. But inside the third aisle, a shadow detaches itself from the shelving, and the whole room decides it was always going to be a scream. It's fast and clumsy and personal, the way gunfights in films never are. No elegant choreography, just hands learning what fear makes them good at, forearms smashing into cheekbones, ribs making sudden, persuasive arguments, someone's breath getting stolen and not immediately returned. You do what you've trained to do, step, pivot, strike, don't look at the floor, and you come out of it with a split lip, a bruise blooming like bad idea across your ribs, and a short knife with someone else's fingerprints on it that you don't remember taking. 2 of theirs crawl away. One of yours can't stand without swearing at his own ankle. No one shoots. That's the one rule everyone still remembers. Bullets bring newspapers, and newspapers bring laws, and laws bring the kind of attention nobody here is paid to manage. The next morning, you're at a funeral that's not called a funeral, incense thick enough to varnish your lungs, hands folded, eyes lowered, names unspoken, because the dead in this life are often the living in someone else's story, and discretion is a kind of aftercare. A senior takes your hand longer than a handshake should last and squeezes twice, which means you're being seen, which means you're being weighed, which means sleep is a hobby for people with less interesting enemies. Money, meanwhile, becomes a weather system. Pachinko parlours that trembled coins into rivers last month run dry this week. The back room with the dice suddenly has bad luck built into the felt. The wholesaler, who always rounded down, starts rounding up as if mathematics were a suggestion. You're dispatched to remind, to cajole, to stand in doorways with your politest frown and your most generous menace. Some pay, some stall. One weeps, which teaches you something hideous. Pity is a luxury item in your trade and you can't afford it anymore. An old woman you've known since she sold cigarettes, one at a time, from a tray, taps your sleeve and tells you softly, as if sharing a recipe, that the other family's boys offered to watch her street for less than you charge, and she wonders if you could perhaps... She doesn't finish the sentence. You smile with your eyes and tell her you'll take care of it, and you mean it in both senses. And on the walk back to the car, you discover that your mouth has learned how to taste metal even when you're not bleeding. The oyabun begins meeting you by name. Not often, not long, but enough to turn your days into a chessboard where you are both a piece and a student of the pieces. He asks about small things with the gravity of large things. Who was present at that door? Who poured for whom? Who avoided looking at the floor after the toast? And you realize that in a war like this, micro-expressions are battlefields. When he dismisses you with the faintest nod, it feels like being paroled from a sentence you didn't realize you were serving. There's a police sweep one Friday that doesn't net anyone important because it wasn't meant to. It was meant to make noise, to jam the gears, to force you to spend Saturday repairing what Friday broke. They take a ledger you kept clean, a ledger you kept dirty, and a ledger you didn't know existed. They leave you your temper and your patience as if to see which you'll use first. You call 3 numbers and learn 4 things. Who warned them, who didn't, who couldn't, and who wanted you to think they did. None of it helps you sleep. When sleep comes, it's the kind that pretends to be rest and is really just rehearsal. You dream you're running down a hallway that keeps changing its mind about where it ends. You dream your mother's voice saying your name in a tone you haven't earned in years. You dream of ink, the Irizumi you've been slowly building, crawling in the wrong direction under your skin, rewriting itself into a confession you didn't sign. You wake with your hand on the knife by habit and discover that your left pinky has started twitching when you're angry, which feels like your body volunteering for a ritual it may one day be ordered to perform. It arrives as gossip first. The rival family lost a warehouse fire that was absolutely natural. A mid-level lieutenant of theirs forgot how cars work. At the exact moment a truck learned how brakes fail, a police captain's nephew took a swing at the wrong man and discovered that rank doesn't make bone unbreakable. Then it arrives as instruction. New routes, new faces, new hours, because the old ones have acquired too many eyes. You switch meeting spots like socks. You learn to talk while looking at reflections. You discover that umbrellas are excellent at carrying meaning when opened or closed at the right second. There's an internal audit, not called that because we don't use business words for things that feel like moral inventory, but that's what it is. Numbers paired with faces, faces paired with responsibilities, responsibilities paired with liabilities. A man you never saw sweat before sweats through his shirt. A man you thought was a coward is revealed as a hoarder of receipts and the kind of ally you didn't know you needed. Someone goes missing gently. A transfer to the countryside, a sabbatical, an apology. And you hear the whisper nobody says aloud. Yubitsumi, without the tablecloth, the other kind. The one where the whole of you is the part you give up. Your Kyodai calls you for tea and pours it himself, which means either he's about to promote you or use you as a lightning rod. He asks about your mother in a voice so soft it peels you. And then he asks, just as softly, whether you would be willing, in the event of a necessary correction, to stand behind him in a room where words are replaced by implements and outcomes are measured in whether a man leaves upright or carried. You say yes because that's the shape your mouth makes now when loyalty asks for proof. And afterward, in the restroom, with the cold water running too long over your wrists, you admit to the mirror that you don't know which version of you answered. The city's media finds the story and does what media does. It names everything, with language that makes civilians feel included in a drama they'd cross the street to avoid. It says, violence erupted, as if violence were weather and not choreography. It uses the phrase underworld sources say, because it's easier than saying, a man who likes the sound of his own voice told me this in exchange for hearing mine. And you read every line, because to not read is to surrender the narrative. And to read is to invite a headache that no medicine in your bathroom understands. A hostess you've known for 2 years and complimented exactly the right amount asks you, in a tone that says she's spent a day rehearsing whether this wall will touch her street, and you lie with conviction because sometimes kindness is indistinguishable from deception. She calls you kind. You reorder the word inside yourself to see if it fits. Then, because plots want climaxes even when men don't, the rival family decides to do something unki loud. A convoy of theirs rolls through a market you treat as an artery. They don't stop. They don't look. They just make sure everyone sees their paint, their faces, their confidence. It's not an attack. It's worse. It's rehearsal footage posted publicly. 2 hours later, you're in a car behind glass that has opinions about bullets. And the Oyabun's driver is being careful with yellow lights. The Oyabun says 4 sentences in 10 minutes. None are about revenge. All are about timing. Your part becomes very simple and very complicated. You are to be visible in 3 places and invisible in 2. You are to carry nothing that clinks everything that cuts. You are to agree to a meeting that is not a meeting, at a shrine that is neutral until it remembers which donations were larger, with men who will arrive smiling because that's what men do when they plan to be photographed by gods. You wear the suit you reserve for weddings and arrests. You remove the ring you've been pretending meant nothing. You check the blade in your shoe twice, then a 3rd time, because superstition is just experience wearing beads. The shrine smells like cedar and rain. Lanterns line a path that has no interest in your war. The men arrive in pairs, as if for symmetry. The first 5 minutes are choreography, bows at the depth required by rank and rumour, small talk designed to make translators feel employed, jokes as ancient as the roof beams. Then the air tightens, the Oyabun's Waka Gashira says the number, their Waka Gashira says a different number, and the person tasked with writing history in this moment, that would be you, with your posture and your gaze and the knife you're not going to use, understands that arithmetic is about to invite physics. A shout from the road cracks the scene. Not police, worse, an opportunist with no badge and too much initiative. And in the space between breath and impulse, 3 things happen. One of theirs reaches inside his jacket and discovers that even a shrine has echoes. One of yours steps forward and becomes the taller wall, and you move exactly the distance your Kyodai showed you last month when he said, "Distance is a religion." No blades, no bullets. Just hands reminding faces that negotiations are conducted by lungs that enjoy air. It lasts as long as it needed to, which is to say, just long enough for everyone present to remember that the next round, if mishandled, would be the last round. That night, nobody sleeps and everyone pretends they did. You sit on your balcony with the city pretending at quiet beneath you, and you make a list you don't write down. Who would die for you? Who would use you? Who would sell you in pieces labelled misunderstanding? Who would mourn, and for how long? The list is shorter than it used to be. You decide not to be offended by math. A courier finds you at noon with a small wrapped box. Inside, a clean white cloth, folded precisely, and a short letter in a hand you recognize as your Kyodai's. 6 characters that together mean be ready to make something right. Your left pinky seems suddenly louder than the rest of your hand. You close the box, you put it on the table, you pour tea that tastes like nothing, and you accept that readiness is a verb you will need to conjugate soon. And because life insists on complications, your sister calls. She asks if you can attend your nephew's school performance this weekend. He has a line in the play. He's been practicing bowing like a samurai. Can you come and clap at the right time? You promise yes with a voice that sounds to you like someone else's. And when you hang up, you laugh once. Not because anything is funny, but because the absurdity has a shape you recognize, and recognition is a kind of mercy. You go to work. You do what you're told. You learn 2 more back entrances to buildings you've visited for years. You practice tying one-handed knots while looking bored. You stop checking your phone at red lights. You admire a new koi on a brother's shoulder that he swears didn't hurt, and you both pretend to believe him. You change your walking route home 3 nights in a row and decide you like the old one better, then keep the new one anyway. When the blow finally lands, it doesn't come from the rival family. It comes from your own. A small betrayal packaged as a clerical error, a little theft decorated as efficiency, a missing sum that could be forgiven if the timing were different. Your name appears near enough to the miscalculation that you can feel the conversation forming 2 rooms away from you. This is how the machine protects itself. By demonstrating, it can amputate without limping. Your Kyodai calls you in. The white cloth from the box has been unfolded and placed on the table like a stage. He looks at you, not like a judge, not like a father, but like a man who has run out of better options. The Oyabun will forgive the family if the family demonstrates it can discipline itself, he says. Discipline is a word that tastes like steel. You sit, you listen. You think about the nephew's play. You think about the hostess who asked you whether the war would touch her street. You think about the woman with the cigarette tray and the truck you used to load before your suit had this particular shine. You think about the fact that the part you're supposed to offer isn't the part of you that did anything wrong. It's the part of you that will most effectively teach other parts to behave. And you know, with a weight that arrives without flourish, that your life has narrowed to the point where the remaining choices all look like loyalty. You place both hands on your knees and bow. The knife is already on the cloth, clean, small, indifferent. Your Kyodai looks away because there are pieces of this ritual that don't require witnesses, only memory. You breathe once, twice. You speak a single sentence so soft it can either be forgiveness or apology, depending on which ear catches it. You reach. The phone in your pocket buzzes. You shouldn't look. You do. A message, a time, a place, a name. Not your nephew's, but a policeman's. The detective with the clipboard smile, and the three characters that mean, he will be there alone. You feel the room tilt as timelines collide, one in which you bleed to preserve a shape of order that has kept you fed, and another in which you stand up, walk out, and make a different kind of offering in a different kind of temple. Your Kyodai sees the flicker cross your face. He's trained to. He says nothing, which is permission, or a test, or both. The cloth waits. The city hums. The war continues in 10 places at once. You put the phone down beside the knife, align them as if order can be made from arrangement, and you tell yourself the lie you need to move. That whichever choice you make will be the last compromise you're asked for. Then you choose. And you don't tell anyone which way you went, because in this world, survival is sometimes just the skill of keeping the most dangerous sentence unfinished. In the end, you learn that the line between loyalty and self-preservation is thinner than the edge of the blade you almost used. The war doesn't end, the streets don't grow quieter, and the faces around you don't become more trustworthy, but you walk away, still breathing, still part of the city's pulse, knowing that in the world of the Yakuza, survival is never about winning. It's about living long enough to see the next move.